Hello, everybody. In the next 20 minutes, I will be showing you the things I've done around trying to turn the Launchpad into a PWA. A little while ago, I was working on a Launchpad that was hosted in Canada. And Canada and Australia are quite far apart. So the latency on the library calls and the OData calls and the service calls was quite out there. So I'm talking like even on a good day, it was 200, 300 milliseconds per request. So the Launchpad took quite a while to come up. And then I realized that in Australia, being a very large country with patchy internet, it's often a struggle for clients here to make information available to their users simply because internet is either not there or it's very slow out in like very sparsely populated areas. So instead of continuing working on the catalogs and groups that I was trying to put together at the time, I spent the morning deploying a very simple service worker to the root of the Launchpad. And because you can use a service worker to cache things, the improvement was quite dramatic. And I didn't really think too much about that until a couple months after. And I thought, if I can install a service worker, why can I not install a manifest as well and see if we can use this as a standalone application or make it available offline entirely. So that's what I did, and that's what I will be showing you in the next 15 minutes or so. I will go over the results of that, and then I will show you what that's like in the browser and how I implemented that in the NetWeaver system. So I have a NetWeaver trial system set up for this. It's in my cupboard under the stairs at home. It works very well, and I will be sharing my screen now, and I will show you what I've done. Here we go. This is the it's my laptop screen. This is the NetWeaver trial. It's the latest version at the moment. And this is running the service worker and the manifest. Before I dig into the actual website, I wanted to go over a couple screenshots first from the Canadian Launchpad. So this is a Launchpad with no caching whatsoever, and you can see the time for a load there is what, 600 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, and in total that's 9 seconds and 9.3 seconds down here at the bottom. With only browser caching, so with after having hit refresh a couple times, that went down to 7.5, but that is still not an amazing performance. You can see library CSS, for instance, 4 milliseconds, that came out of the browser's memory cache. But since the browser doesn't cache everything because of the way things are loaded, the service worker turned that into milliseconds. So the whole thing took off another 30% of the load time. Now imagine doing this in a remote location, or if your latency is actually like a second and a half. So the results of the manifest and the service worker are available on your phone. Here's a little video. So that's opening my Launchpad. I hope this is visible for everybody. That's the demo application that is provided with the NetWeaver trial system. I made 1 or 2 changes, but nothing dramatic. And now we can turn that into flight mode. And this still works. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It also works if you try to do this on your desktop. Where's that? Because this is an installable application now. That's the same Launchpad. It's now running as a Mac application. It's a Chrome application, but it's launchable from your dock or your Windows taskbar. that's the results. That's as far as I got tinkering with the tools at hand. So the advantages here are, well, I think they're quite clear. This is a pretty zippy experience. The caching is more controllable by and large. You can, with a service worker at least, and the way I've implemented it, you can pre-cache applications. So you can, when the service worker starts, and we'll go over that in a minute as well, you can preload component preloads, for instance. If you know that your top 10 applications are a particular type or particular list, then you can preload all of them and have the code available in the browser before the user even gets to it. So that will improve experience there as well. And last, the basic implementation of this is actually really quite simple. It's a 90-line service worker and a 20-line extension to the FLP. All in all, it took a little while to put together, but the basics of it are not hard. So I'm now going to go back to the actual browser. I had some slides prepared, but it seems easier to just keep going at this point because they're just iterating what I'm going to be showing you now. Showing is better. So here's the Launchpad again, this time with the tools open, right? You can see that most of these things either come through the service worker or the disk, the cache already, right? So this is, sometimes you see duplicates. So when you're working with a PWA, the little thing with the icon is whatever the service worker decided to do. So in this case, it was a fetch from disk, apparently, because I guess there's normal browser caching available for this one, but others are loaded live anytime. So settings, for instance, will be loaded live. The FLP page itself will always be loaded live when available. So in your network tab, you can quite clearly see that the latency and the load times for these is absolutely marginal, right? There's not much here. So to look at the actual service worker then, we have our application tab. Now a service worker can do a great many things these days, although implementations cross-browser can be a little patchy. But the basics of the events that we're looking at today, that's supported quite well. So the only events we are going to be looking at is the installation of the thing, the activation of the thing, and the fetch handler. So on installation of a service worker, when it's first downloaded and installed into your browser, it's good practice, according to Google, who invented the PWA, to clear your existing caches. So you can use that as a way to control the size of the cache for the user. It's just if you don't clear that cache for a year or something, it's going to end up gigantic, right? Especially with a lot of OData calls or heavily used applications that gets large quickly. So the forcing an installation is a good way to do that. The second one is the sorry, the first one is the activate. I get them all confused all the time. The install is used to do the pre-caching that I was talking about before, which is really just presenting a list of URLs that you would like the service worker to load. Now, because the service worker runs in a separate thread, this will not impact your performance on the Launchpad itself at all. It just sits there ticking away in the background, filling your cache with whatever you want to store for the user to make available immediately, essentially. The last is the fetch event, which is actually the meat of the service worker, right? So every request that your browser makes passes through the fetch request, the fetch event of your service worker. So with that in mind, and I have to scroll back up a little first, you can come up with strategies for this, for the handling of that request. So you can come up with an offline first strategy, for instance, in which case you first check the cache, and if there is nothing in it, then you load it online. Or you come up with an online first strategy, in which case you first try to see if the browser is online. And if it is, then you fetch it. And if it's not, you fall back to a loaded, previously stored version. So that's the way you deal with OData calls or settings or any sort of state, right? App state. If you find yourself in an area with no coverage, or your phone is offline, or whatever the case may be, then you can always browse previously stored data in the applications that are in your cache as well. So in my case, I decided to have a fairly naive sort of regular expression to do anything in the UI5 space with a what's it called again, a cache buster token in it. I called that to be the offline first cache, and the others are going into the data cache, which is going to be everything else. And well, that's what you're looking at now in the network tab over here. There are a few gotchas here, mainly in the things that the service worker can and cannot cache. So you cannot. The first errors in my console were actually the service worker trying to cache a Chrome plugin. They don't start. The protocol is actually Chrome plugin, I think. Chrome extension. Okay, so those are all going to fail and throw errors. You can also only cache GET requests. So post requests are used to create data, and put requests to change data, the other way around, I can never remember. So that is really of no use to the service worker itself, and its use is actually prohibited. You get an error if you do. So I decided to just not bother with those at all. Everything else is filtered into the fetch handler itself, and this is where we end up with a list that looks like this. So that's the service worker part. The second part to a PWA is a manifest, which is really a very small bit of JSON that tells your browser what the start of your application is going to be, what your theme colors are, and what your icons are. So in this case, I chose a few nice Fiori logos here, Launchpad logos, and that's what you see in my dock down here, and what the app icon is on my phone, and also what I think for Android phones that displays a splash screen that uses these themes and these images. So that's what the manifest brings. If you want to see what your cache is actually like, we have the Launchpad libraries here. They're all loaded in this fashion. You can see the size here and when they were last cached. And here are the data calls. So this is the online first bucket, right? And everything is there. So having said that, this this could not work without implementing that somehow into the FLP itself. So, and I know this is not very UI5-ish of me. I will actually be taking you to my SAP GUI at the moment to show you what how I implemented that. Because it turns out the FLP itself, this is SICF. The Launchpad itself is a server-side rendered application. And I really just extended that. This is the whole thing. Why is this so large? And it just gives you a string back. I decided to do this on the server side as well, because it means I can actually add a cache buster. So every week my service worker is refreshed, my cache is cleaned out, my preloads are done again, and that is it. So the only thing I'm really doing here is replacing, and I apologize to the Launchpad developers, replacing the head tag with a bit of code of my own, which is just adding the it's a bit hard to read, but this is the event listener for the service worker. This is the service worker registration here. And here is the manifest, which I inlined. So I found with the manifest, actually, if I did this as a proper manifest with the URL, like a CSS file, it works pretty much the same. I found that it gave me an unauthorized error while looking at the manifest just as a website. I just saw JSON, but instead of figuring that out, I inlined it because that was just quicker at the time. But it is a bit harder to read. I'm not super keen on that. Anyway, that's the FLP bit. So the service worker then is also in the SICF. Here we go. Now I put this in the /SAP namespace directly because the service worker scope by default is everything. It's installed it and below it. So if you want to cache both UI5 application and a OData call, it kind of has to live here. Otherwise you miss out on the BC versus OPU bucket. So the service worker also is a fairly simple handler. Don't worry, I didn't actually write it this way. I wrote a script that converted my JavaScript into an ABAP method, and I just kept copying and pasting it. But I did this only because I wanted to show you that the preloads can be anything you like, really. So this is my one test application. This is a test approval PO that you see on the Launchpad. I'm grabbing the cache ID and I'm adding it to my preloads. So if you want to take this further, right, you could personalize a service worker. Like I've mentioned the top 10 applications, but maybe you can just read a user's profile. I mean, just pre-cache his entire swathe of accessible apps, right? And yeah, this is the code from the service worker that you've already seen. That's it. That's all there was. The only other thing was hosting the images for the manifest, which are in the MIME repository. But that's really all I did. That was also the demo. Now there are two caveats which I really have to mention. And I'll show you the biggest one. Now I know that SAP are working on this, and it was already alluded to in the previous session, which was kind of nice. If you set this to offline, correct, now it works. It shouldn't. The Launchpad uses synchronous HTTP requests in a few spots, and synchronous HTTP requests bypass the service worker entirely. So if I were to do this on my phone, it would not open. Once the app is open, and on your phone an app is open, generally until you close it, it's fine, right? It is not fine currently. But I'm hoping that in the future, as soon as the synchronous requests are converted into asynchronous requests, this will pop up. The second gotcha is that a batch request, you know, the $batch thing on OData v2 in any case, is a post request. And post requests cannot be cached. So that's the change I made to my demo application. I changed I turned off the batch processing on that. For most applications, I would suggest that's fine, but there are a few heavily used applications that are bound very tightly to the batch request, like my inbox. If you try to turn batch mode off on my inbox, the whole thing will die. So that is a bit of a caveat. I think I've spoken fast enough and I'm running out of time. So I think that also concludes everything I wanted to tell you about my PWA, and I hope you enjoyed what you saw.
Thanks very much. Very impressive and right on time. Perfect. We have a couple of questions. One of them is the code available? I would love to see the implementation of the service worker, to be honest.
Yeah, I will make an ABAP Git available sometime after the show.
Perfect, thanks. Then next question, is there any reason why you don't use the workbox library? It contains those network first and cache first strategies as well as pre-cache handling.
Yeah, that is correct, and I considered that, but then I used the library and I still didn't know how the events work myself. So yes, you feel free to use the workbox. It's absolutely fine.
Okay. Next question, can you implement this as an FLP plugin?
Yes, that is also a good question, and yes, you can. I decided not to because I like the server-side part of it. And also, I like the fact that I can load it first. The plugins load last, in which case your service worker is activated after everything has already been loaded, which means that the next load will miss all of the existing calls. Yes, you can do this as an FLP plugin if you don't want to muck around with the FLP itself, which I understand can be, yeah, that was a bit dodgy.
Okay. We have time. Yeah, we have still a bit of time. Did you face any issues regarding authentication? Have you tried SAML?
I have not. This is a NetWeaver trial system, and I've only tried it on this. Oh, I should mention that you can only load a service worker if you have your Launchpad protected with an SSL certificate. I did not go through the trouble of S-Trust, but I did put an Nginx box in front of it with certbot. So yeah, otherwise you might be able to if you load Chrome with those insecure flags, but otherwise the service worker will refuse to install.
Okay, thanks. I think, yeah, last question. I thought Apple was not keen on supporting PWAs because that would eat into their App Store revenue. So have you run into limitations on iOS?
Not with the functionality that I have used. If I wanted to use this for push notifications, for instance, which the service worker can do as well, then that will not work on an iOS device. Now, iOS 14 has made some improvements to the PWA handling, but it's still far from great. So for the purpose of what I've shown you, it's all fine on an Apple device.